Chapter 11. Don't elves ever do anything the normal way? Sophie asked as she watched the waves crash far below. Their bubble bobbed on the breeze, high in the clouds. Where's the fun in that? Alden smiled, lifted the worry she'd been carrying since they left Quinlan's office. If he could relax, maybe things weren't as scary as they seemed. Plus, it was hard to feel anything other than pure joy as she floated above the world in a giant bubble. Especially when Fitz took her hand again. Ready to go home? He asked, holding his Pathfinder in the sunlight. She barely had time to agree. The bubble popped, and she could only get half of her scream out before the warm rush whisked them away. Sophie squinted in the glaring light. I thought you meant my home, she said as she stared once again at the enormous gates of Everglen. She was actually relieved. They still hadn't explained what she was supposed to tell her family about all of this. In fact, there were quite a few things they hadn't explained. Her brain felt ready to burst with all the unanswered questions. So, what am I supposed to... Her question was cut off short by a flash of light that made everyone shield their faces. When Sophie opened her eyes, a tall elf in a simple black tunic strode toward them. His olive skin stood in sharp contrast to his blonde hair, and while his face held youth, some ancient shone in his dark blue eyes. You've got some nerve summoning me, he shouted, stepping right into Alden's personal space. He was a couple of inches shorter than Alden, but he didn't seem the least bit intimidated by the height difference. I'd sooner be exiled than train anyone in your family. From the corner of her eye, Sophie saw Fitz's hands clench into fists. Alden barely blinked. He took a small step backward and smiled. Yes, Tiergan, I'm well aware of your opinion of me. I can assure you, I wouldn't have summoned you if I wasn't convinced that it would be what Prentiss would want. Tiergan's fierce expression crumbled. He backed away, crossing his arms against his chest. Since when are you the expert on anything Prentiss wanted? Who's Prentiss? Sophie had to ask. Tiergan spun toward her, and his eyes did a quick inventory, widening when they locked with hers. Yes, Alden said when Tiergan gasped. Whatever you're thinking, yes. Tiergan, I'd like you to meet Sophie Foster, Foxfire's newest prodigy, who happens to need a telepathy mentor. Tiergan swallowed several times before he spoke. She isn't the one, is she? The one Prentiss was hiding? Yes, Alden agreed. She's been living with humans. But it's about me. She glanced at Fitz for help, but he shrugged, like it was out of his hands. If it becomes important for you to know, I will tell you, Alden promised. For now, all anyone needs to know is that you are the most incredible telepath I've ever seen, and you need a mentor. Which is why I've summoned you, he added, turning to Tiergan. Sophie has already broken through Fitz and Bronte's blocking without training. She needs the best mentor we can provide. I know you're retired, but I thought, given the circumstances, you might be persuaded to return to Foxfire. Anger and resentment danced across Tiergan's features, so the last thing Sophie expected was for him to nod. You'll do it? Alden asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and relief. Yes, but only for this year. That'll be more than enough to hone her abilities. Then you will leave me alone and never ask for my assistance again. That's more than reasonable, Alden agreed. Wait, Sophie interrupted. Do I get any say in this? What do you mean? Alden asked. She needed a deep breath before she could answer. I'm not sure I want to get better at telepathy. She'd always hated reading minds, and that was before she had to worry about serious rules and restrictions on it. And Tiergan didn't even seem like he wanted to train her. Maybe it was just better to pretend she wasn't a telepath at all. Are you crazy? Fitz asked. Do you have any idea what an opportunity this is? Tiergan raised a hand, silencing him. He took a step closer to Sophie, waiting for her to meet his eyes. Being a telepath around humans is quite a burden. I bet you've had terrible headaches and heard all kinds of things you didn't want to hear, right? She nodded, stunned by a sudden change in mood. He sounded almost kind. He frowned and looked away, mumbling something she mostly didn't understand, but she caught the word irresponsible. It doesn't have to be that way, he said after a second. With proper training, you'll learn to manage your ability, but you do have a choice. There should always be a choice. He said the last part louder, like it was for Alden's benefit. If you don't want telepathy training, you won't have it. Sophie could feel the weight of everyone's stares. She knew what Alden and Fitz wanted her to say, and it would be nice to control her ability. I guess I could give it a try. You guess. Fitz snorted, so low he probably thought she couldn't even hear it. Tiergan glared at him, and Fitz looked away, his cheeks. Why do I have to hide it? She asked. His words touched a bruise. She thought she was done hiding her abilities. You won't have to hide it forever, Alden said gently. Just for a little while, to give everyone time to adjust to you. In the meantime, the session will be listed as remedial studies on your schedule. Adjust. Like she was a problem they'd have to get used to. And why didn't they call it elf lessons for dummies while they were at it? I know this is all very confusing, Sophie, but I will do my best to explain everything when we get inside, okay? Alden asked. She nodded. What choice did she have? Good. He turned to Tiergan, who had backed a few feet away from everyone. I'm assuming you don't want to come in? Finally! A correct assumption. Tiergan's voice was cold, but it warmed when he looked at Sophie. I'll see you on Tuesday. Alden laughed. Well, that went better than expected. He licked a panel on the enormous gates, taking Sophie's hand as they swung inward. Come on, Sophie. Let's see if I can answer some of those questions I'm sure are floating around in your head. He led her through Everglen's sprawling grounds, explaining how our new school schedule would have 2 sessions a day, plus lunch and study hall. She'd be a prodigy, their word for a student, and she would carry 8 subjects, most of which were taught one-on-one by a mentor, who were members of the nobility. Sophie's nerves tingled at the idea of one-on-one sessions with royalty. Talk about pressure to succeed. Not to mention how behind she would be. The school year was already in session, and she was starting as a level 2, the proper grade level for her age. So, she'd be starting over, relearning everything she'd ever been taught, and already behind. It was a long way to fall from being top of her class her whole life. Self-doubt weighed heavier on her shoulders with each step, but she fought against it. She belonged here. She needed to believe that. Her fragmented life was finally coming together. Well, almost. What am I supposed to tell my family? She asked Alden. They're not going to let me disappear every day with no explanation. Alden bit his lip as he opened the doors to Everglen and stepped aside to let her and Fitz pass. About that, Sophie, you and I need to have a talk. The sorrow in his eyes made her feel like she'd swallowed something slimy. Clearly, it wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. My office is this way, Alden said, leading her through another shimmering hall. We can talk there. There's much to this. The sound of arguing cut him off, and when they entered a wide sitting room filled with overstuffed armchairs and elegant statues, they found a dark-haired girl about Sophie's age who appeared to be shouting at herself. A woman wearing an elegant purple gown appeared out of thin air next to the girl and said, You're home. Sophie squealed. Fitz snickered. So much for keeping her cool. Sophie, this is my wife Della. Alden's cheeks were pinched, like he was trying not to laugh. And my daughter, Biana, he added, gesturing to the girl. My dear, I don't believe our guest is used to being around vanishers. I'm so sorry, Della said, smiling at Sophie. She had a musical voice with just a hint of Alden and Fitz's accent. Are you okay? Yes, Sophie mumbled, trying not to stare. Della's beauty was like a force, pulling every eye to her as she tossed her long, chocolate-brown hair and pursed her heart-shaped lips. And Biana had all of her parents' best features, combined in the best possible way. It was hard not to feel like a gangly troll, especially when Biana frowned and asked, Is that my dress? Yes, Alden interceded. Sophie needed to borrow it to go on a few errands. I can... Alden ran a hand through his hair, the same way Fitz did when he was frustrated. In that case, I'd better make a call. He turned to Sophie. Then we'll have a long talk, okay? She nodded, a little torn when he set off down the hall. She had a feeling she knew what he was going to say, and she wasn't ready to hear it. But she wasn't sure what to say to Della or Biana. She could feel them staring at her. The council sent these for you, Della said with a radiant smile. She held out 2 parcels wrapped in thick white paper as she walked towards Sophie, blinking in and out with every step, like a strobe light. She doesn't realize she does it, Fix explained when Sophie's eyes widened. Vanishers let light pass through their bodies, so they can turn invisible, even when they move. Della unwrapped the packages. Hold up that pretty blonde hair, will ya? Sophie did as she asked, and Della clasped a thick silver cord around her neck. It fit like a choker with a single pendant, an etched silver loop with a small clear crystal set in the center. Her registry pendant, Della explained. Everyone had to wear one so they could be easily found. Della handed Sophie a tiny green cube. Anytime you need to pay her for anything, just give them that. Your birth fund's been activated. It took a minute for the words birth fund to register. I have money? Della nodded. The standard 5 million. Dollars? Lusters, Fitz corrected, laughing. One luster is probably worth $1,000,000. What's a dollar? Biana interrupted. Human money. She crinkled her perfect little nose. Ew. Sophie ignored the insult. How could elves afford to give away so much money? We do things differently around here, Della explained. Money is something we have, not something we need. No one ever has to go without. Sophie couldn't believe it. But why does anyone work then, if they already have money? What else do we do with our time? I don't know, something fun? Work is fun, Della corrected. Remember, we're not limited to 70 or 80 years. Once you get used to that idea, you'll find it makes our way much more sense. Maybe, she agreed, still trying to wrap her head around it. All set? Alden asked, coming back into the room. Della nodded. Were you able to change their minds? Alden shook his head, and Della's face fell. In fact, everyone looked sad, except Biana, who looked relieved. What's going on? Chapter 12. One wall in Alden's office was a large, curved window overlooking a silvery lake. A floor-to-ceiling aquarium wrapped the rest of the room. Sophie waited in an enormous, wingback chair facing Alden, who sat behind a black desk piled with books and scrolls. Anxiety tightened her chest as the walls of water seemed to close in. Sophie sucked in a deep breath to remind herself she wasn't drowning, and pointed to the stacks of human newspapers piled next to her chair. Articles were circled in red and then crossed out. Keeping up with the news? Looking for you. He removed another newspaper from a drawer and handed her the article with her picture circled. You don't know who sent this to you? She asked. I've a few theories, but no reason to worry. You keep saying that. A hint of irritation crept into her tone. Because it's true. She sighed. Well, if you figure it out, maybe you could find out how the reporter knew about me. My parents are super upset about it. Her heart stuttered as Alden's face fell. I think I know what you're going to say, she said as he opened his mouth to speak. She needed to say it first. That would be the only way to survive it. You're going to tell me I'm not related to my family. She felt a pull, and her chest as the words floated away, like they were taking a part of her with them. Yes, I was planning to discuss that. A shadow passed over his features. But what we really need to talk about is why you can't live with them anymore. The words swam inside her head, refusing to make sense. Alden moved to her side, leaning against the chair as he took her hand. I'm so sorry, Sophie. We've never faced anything like this, and there's no perfect solution. You can't hide your abilities forever, especially as they get stronger. Sooner or later, someone will suspect that you're something other, and we can't allow that to happen, for your safety and ours. Now that the council knows you exist, they've ordered you to move here, effective immediately. She felt the blood drain from her face as his words sank in. Oh. The too simple word couldn't communicate what she felt, but she couldn't come up with anything better. Part of her refused to believe him, refused to accept the impossible things he was saying. The same part wanted to kick and scream and cry until she took her home to her family. But a tiny voice of reason wouldn't let her. Deep, deep down, beneath the fear and the hurt and the pain, she knew he was right. She'd lived every day since she was 5 in constant fear of discovery. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it up. The headaches from her telepathy were almost unbearable, and if they were going to get stronger... not to mention the loneliness. She never felt right with her family. She never had any friends. She didn't belong in the human world, and she was tired of pretending she did. But knowing he was right didn't make it hurt any less, didn't make it any less terrifying. Will I get to visit my family? She asked, grasping for something to calm the fear threatening to overwhelm her. As far as your family and the rest of the humans are concerned, yes. For a moment, she was too stunned to speak, her mind filled with creepy images of gravestones reading, "Here lies Sophie Foster." But one image was even worse. She closed her eyes, desperate to block out the horrifying mental picture, but it only became more vivid, her parents, hovering over her grave with tear-stained faces. "You can't do that to my parents," she whispered, blinking back tears of her own. "We have to. If you disappeared, they would never stop trying to find you. It would draw too much attention to everything." "But don't you know what this'll do to them?" "I wish there were another way." She refused to accept that. Elves could travel on a beam of light and read emotions and probe minds. There had to be a way her family wouldn't suffer. A sickening idea struck her. "Could you make them forget me? Make it like I never existed?" Alden bit his lip. "It's more complicated, but it can be done." "But would that really be better? They'd be relocated. They'd lose their jobs, their house, all their friends." "That's better than thinking their daughter is dead." Her words seemed to hit him, and he turned away, staring deep into the aquarium. "What about you?" he said after a stretch of silence. "These are people you love, Sophie. If we erase you, they won't miss you. They won't even know you exist. Wouldn't that be too painful?" A single tear slipped down her cheek. "Yes, but only for me. For them." She squared her shoulders and set her jaw. "It's the best thing for them." Seconds passed before Alden turned to her, obvious pain in his eyes. "If that's what you want, we'll do it that way." "Thank you," she whispered, hardly believing what she was saying. It felt like her brain was shutting down, too overwhelmed to function. Had she really agreed to have her whole life erased? She sank back into her massive armchair. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she scrubbed them away. "Will I get to say goodbye?" Alden shook his head. "The council specifically forbade me to take you back." The room spun, and small sobs slipped out. It never occurred to her, when she left for school, that it would be the last time she'd see her family ever. It was too much. "Please, I need to say goodbye." Alden studied her face for a long minute before he nodded. "I can't take you without risking a tribunal, but I can give you 20 minutes before I alert the council to change your plans and let Fitz take you. You'll have to change clothes before you go, and get out of there before anyone sees you, or—" Chapter 13. "Where have you been?" her dad shouted as Sophie set foot through the door. His round face, usually so soft, was bent and twisted into hard lines. Her mom rubbed her temples. "We almost called the police." Sophie's eyes burned with unshed tears. Her parents, her house, her whole life for the past 12 years. This was the last time she would see any of it. It was far, far too much for her brain to process, so she did the only thing she could do. She raced across the room, threw her arms around them, and hugged as hard as she could. "Did something happen, Sophie?" her dad asked after a minute. "Your school called and said you left early." His mind flashed to unspoken horrors. Sophie cringed away from his thoughts. "Nothing bad happened. It's just been a strange day." She buried her face in her mom's side. "I love you guys." "We love you too," her mom whispered, totally confused. "What's going on, Soybean?" Sophie trembled at the nickname, proof that she didn't really belong with her family. "She's just trying to get out of trouble," Amy said, bouncing into the room. She loved watching Sophie get busted. "Amy, how many times have I told you not to eavesdrop?" her mom asked. Amy shrugged. "How long is he grounded for?" 3 months, her dad answered. Amy shot Sophie a triumphant look. "It doesn't matter," said Sophie, still hugging her parents. I'm sorry for worrying you guys. I won't do it again, I promise. For once, she would be able to keep her word. Well, maybe 2 months, her mom decided, rubbing Sophie's back. Amy pouted, and Sophie couldn't help smiling at her pettiness. She was stunned to realize at that moment that she was going to miss Amy, her bratty, obnoxious, pain-in-the-butt little sister. Sure, they fought all the time, but fighting with her was fun. Why had she never realized that before? She ran over and wrapped Amy in a hug. Her parents gasped. I'm not being weird. I just want to tell you I love you. I love all of you. She turned to her parents, who were watching this strange scene play out between their daughters with their mouths open. I couldn't have asked for a better family. What happened to you? Amy asked. Nothing. She turned away to blink back tears. I'm going to my room now. Her dad cleared his throat, coming to his senses. You're not off the hook yet, Soybean. We still need to talk about what happened today. We will, she agreed, desperate to get out of there. Fitz was keeping watch outside, and she had to hurry. Later. She raced to her room and packed in a daze. She didn't take much. Everything felt like it belonged to someone else, to another life. When she was done, she allowed herself one more minute to rememorize every detail of her old room. The pale blue walls, the dusty stacks of books piled on every available surface, the blue and yellow quilt her mother made for her when she was a baby. Her room looked empty now. Maybe that was because she felt empty. Then she took a deep breath, turned off the light, and closed the door. She tripped over Marty's furry body in the hall. Sorry, boy, she whispered, crouching next to him. She rubbed his soft fur, trying not to cry. He'd been her only friend, but she couldn't take him with her. Her family would need him. Amy will take care of you, she promised as she Fitz had given her a disc of sleeping gas to release if she couldn't sneak out. She'd hoped she wouldn't have to use it. The idea of drugging her family made her physically ill. But they were waiting at the base of the stairs. Where do you think you're going? Her dad demanded, glaring at the backpack slung over her shoulder. Amy giggled. Aren't you in enough trouble already? Sophie Elizabeth Foster, you tell us what's going on right now, her mom yelled. Sophie stared at them, clutching the sleeping gas, too afraid to use it. I'm sorry, she managed to say. I have to leave. Her dad moved between her and the door. You're not going anywhere. It's not up to me. Sit down, he demanded, pointing at the living room couch. Clearly, they weren't going to let her go, and her time was up. Fine. I'll promise I'll explain everything if you just sit down and listen to me. She cringed at the lie, hating herself for saying it, but it worked. They moved to the couch and waited for her to start talking. She fingered the disc, ordering her hands to spin the top the way Fitz had shown her, but she couldn't. She couldn't let the last words she said to them be a lie. Please, please know that I love you. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done to me. I have to go now, but I'll never forget you. Tears blurred their faces as she held her breath and twisted the disc between her hands. Air rushed past her fingers as the gas released, and she dropped it and backed away. Somehow, she managed to count to 30 to let the glass clear before she breathed. Then, she crumpled to the floor, burying her face in her hands. It's okay, Sophie. It's going to be okay. It took her a second to recognize that the voice belonged to Fitz. He crouched on the floor, holding her against his shoulder. Some part of her brain knew that she should be embarrassed about smearing tears and drool and snot all over his jacket, but she couldn't make herself care. I drugged my family. You did the right thing. It doesn't feel like the right thing. He squeezed her tighter as another round of sobs overcame her. Look, Sophie, I feel like a jerk for saying this, but we have to get out of here. The washers could be here any second, and they can't find us here. Washers? Telepaths trained to erase memories. I'm sure the council has sent them by now. She forced her arms to let go of him and wiped her tear-stained face on his shirt. Just give me a second. I'll go get your bags. Are they upstairs? She pointed to her worn purple backpack. This is all I'm taking. That's all? What am I supposed to take? What am I going to need it for? It's now or never, Sophie. Don't leave anything behind that you might regret later. No, there's nothing. She stopped as she realized there was. Something she'd decided to leave because she was too embarrassed to take it with her. Something she suddenly couldn't bear to leave without. Ella, she whispered. Saying her name made her feel a tiny bit better. I haven't slept without her since I was 5. I thought I should leave her behind, but she couldn't finish. Where is she? Upstairs, on my bed. She's a bright blue elephant wearing a Hawaiian shirt. She blushed, but he didn't laugh. Somehow he seemed to understand. I'll be right back, he promised. She closed her eyes so she wouldn't have to see her family's limp bodies, and counted the seconds until Fitz returned. When he handed her the warm blue elephant, she was surprised at how much better she felt. Now she had something to hold on to. Chapter 14. Alden and Della waited outside, pacing in the glow from Everglen's enormous gates. As soon as the doors swung open, Della wrapped Sophie in a tight hug, stroking her hair and whispering that everything would be okay. Sophie waited for the tears to come, but she'd cried herself out. No one saw us, Fitz assured Alden, handing over the black Pathfinder. Thank you, Fitz. My dear, you might want to let her breathe, he told Della. Della released her from the stranglehold, and Sophie took a shaky breath. Are you okay? Alden asked, deep shadows haunting his face. No, she admitted. He nodded. It gets easier from here. I hope so. She hugged Ella. What happens now? Della and I are personally going to oversee your family's relocation. Fitz can help you get settled in here while we're gone. Here? I'll be living here? Hope flared. Living with Alden and Della would be amazing. Della wrung her hands. Oh, Sophie, we'd love that. We even offered. But the council wanted you placed with other guardians. Guardians? The title sounded cold and formal. I selected them personally, Alden assured her. They're good friends of ours. You're going to like them. Okay, she agreed without much enthusiasm. It was hard to be excited about living with strangers, but she was too worn out to think about it. We'll talk more tomorrow, Alden said. Right now, we have to get going. Fitz, Alwyn's waiting to see Sophie. Fitz nodded. Della gave Sophie one more hug before she moved to Alden's side. He held the blue crystal Pathfinder to the light. Where are you moving my family to? Sophie had to ask. Alden sighed. I'm sorry, Sophie, I can't tell you that. It took her a second to understand why. You're afraid I'll try to see them. The temptation might be hard to resist. A shiver raked through her as the reality settled into her bones. She would never see her family again. She was an orphan. Why don't you take Sophie inside, Fitz? Alden suggested quietly. Alwyn's waiting for her in the conservatory. Fitz tried to lead her away, but Sophie turned back to face Alden. My family always wanted a house with a big backyard so they could get a dog. That can be arranged, Alden promised. We'll take good care of them, Della added. They'll have money, security, and everything they could ever want. Well, except... She didn't finish the thought. Any doubt Sophie might have had about choosing to be erased disappeared in that moment. Knowing she'd saved her family from the throbbing ache she was suffering made it worth it. Her last gift to them, to thank them for everything they'd done for her. They didn't ask to raise an elf as their daughter, and it certainly hadn't been easy. Which made her wonder, why them? How had two average humans ended up raising an elf, without even knowing it? More important, why? She met Alden's eyes, her lips already forming the question, but stopped at the last second. She wasn't ready to hear about the family who had abandoned her. Whatever their story was, she doubted it was a good one, and she'd pretty much had all the bad news she could take for one night. So, she let Fitz lead her, deciding not to watch as Alden and Della disappeared to wipe away all traces of her existence. Who's Elwyn? Sophie asked as Fitz led her down another long, glittering hallway. He's a physician. He's gonna do a quick physical on you. What are you doing? Bianna asked from behind them. Nothing, Fitz told her, dragging Sophie a few steps in the right direction. Where were you? I asked Dad, but he couldn't tell me. That's because it's none of your business, Fitz said. Will you tell me later? Drop it, okay? I'm a little busy right now. I can see that. Bianna grumbled, glaring at their hands. Sophie tried to jerk free, not sure if she liked what Bianna was implying. Fitz tightened his grip. Don't even think about it. I'm taking you to Elwyn, and you're gonna see it's no big deal. She lost the will to resist under Bianca's glare, so she let him pull her to an arched, golden door at the end of the hall. Fitz stood behind her, blocking any possible escape. I'll take your stuff to your room. Why don't you hang on to Ella? He whispered. Maybe she'll help. Thanks, she mumbled. She handed over her backpack but made no move to open the door. Fitz leaned towards her. I'll tell you what. If anything bad happens there, I'll let you punch me in the stomach as hard as you can. Sound fair? She nodded. She caught Bianca The glass walls of the conservatory bathed everything in soft moonlight, and enormous plants grew in glowing pots around the room. Some of the gigantic flowers looked like they could eat her, but Sophie barely noticed them. She kept her eyes glued to the man, the elf, leaning over her low, cushioned cot, ready to bolt the second he pulled out a syringe. This goes a lot faster if you hold still, Elwyn said as he adjusted her pillow. She nodded and tried not to fidget, but between his wild, dark hair and huge, iridescent spectacles, he reminded her way too much of a mad scientist. He lifted her right arm. What are you doing? He snapped his fingers, and a ball of green light formed around her elbow. See? Painless. She stared at the glowing orb. How'd you do that? I'm a flasher. I can manipulate light the way I want it, though I'm not skilled as Orm Vacker. You'll see this crazy light show the next total eclipse. It's one of our biggest celebrations. It was strange to think that the elves had their own traditions, but it also made sense. The elves lived in their own world, and she needed to learn more about it, and quick, so she didn't look like an idiot all the time. Whoa, that's some serious damage. It's not permanent, he added when she tensed, and it's not your fault. Toxic food, toxic water, toxic air. What chance do your poor innocent cells have? You can see my cells. Of course. Did you think I was wearing those glasses because they make me look dashing? She smiled. What do they do? Anything, depending on what color of light I use. He snapped again, flashing blue and purple and red orbs of light around her body and squinting through the lenses. Then he took the glasses off, and Sophie was relieved to see he wasn't as stunningly perfect looking as the other elves she'd met. His eyes were more of a gray than a blue, and his mouth was a little too small for his broad jaw, but when he smiled, his whole face lit up. You can sit up now, he told her, holding a small silver square in front of her eyes when she did. He frowned. What? Just tell me. I can take it. He laughed. You're so dramatic. I was expecting your eye color to be from the toxins, but they're perfect. They're just brown. They always have been, even when I was a baby. Do you know why? The last question came out as a whisper. No idea. I'm sure there's a reason, but I have to do some research. It'll be a great case study for the books once I can figure it out. What? No. You can't. No problem. Elwyn laughed. He rifled through the satchel slung across his shoulder and removed tiny vials of colored liquids. Now, try not to let this worry you, but your body needs a major detox. We'll start with these. Sophie braced for the bitter burn of medicine, but the bottles were filled with sweet syrups, like nectar from unknown fruits. They made her tingly and warm inside. Good girl, Elwyn said as he cleared the empty vials away. He placed a large, clear bottle in front of her. All of us drink one of these every day, but I want you to drink 2 for a while to make up for the lost time. Youth in a bottle, she read from the label. Like the fountain of youth? I suppose that is where those legends came from, he agreed. It has a few enzymes that are essential for our health. The water was cold and slightly sweet, and somehow more refreshing than what she tasted before. She downed the contents in one big gulp and handed the empty bottle back to him. He gave her another, and she drank it just as fast. I don't have a few of the medicines you need, but I'll give out on the list. I want you to come see me in a couple of weeks for a follow-up. Her face twisted into a scowl before she could stop it. Elwyn laughed. It won't be so bad, just a quick checkup. I work at Foxfire, you can stop by any time. Mention of her new school made her tug out a couple of loose eyelashes. What are you doing? Sorry, nervous habit. You tear out your eyelashes? It doesn't hurt. Still. You sound like my mom. The warmth of the medicines faded as the reality of everything that had happened rushed back. Well, I thought she was my mom. He sat next to her on the cot. Alden told me about that. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. She stared at Ella, hugging her tighter. He whistled. You're a pretty brave kid. Her cheeks heated up. I know, Slime, but I'm teasing. Personally, I can't sleep without Stinky the Stegosaurus. There's no shame in that. He laughed. Anyway, you should get some sleep. You've had a big day. I'll see you in a few weeks. So, you gonna punch me? Fitz asked as he showed her to her room. I guess not, she mumbled, feeling horrified about the big production she'd made. He must think she was the biggest wimp ever. Fitz grinned. What's with that doctor phobia thing? You were more afraid of Elwyn than you were of jumping into the whirlpool. I guess you've never had anyone stick a needle into your arm or strap you to a bunch of machines. You're right about that. He shuddered and she felt a little better. At least he understood her fear now. Why do they do that to you? The shots are because I had an allergic reaction a couple of years ago. She rubbed her arm, remembering the bruise the needles gave her. The machines are because I hit my head when I was 5. How'd you do that? I guess I passed out and cracked my head on the concrete. I don't remember. All I know is that I woke up in the hospital and my parents were freaking out, saying my neighbor had called 911 and that I'd be unconscious for a couple of hours. That happened when you were 5? She nodded. Was that before or after telepathy started? Same time. I started reading minds in the hospital. I always thought something happened to my brain when I fell, but I guess it was my elf genes kicking in. He didn't respond. What? It's just, telepathy doesn't kick in that age. Something would have to trigger it. Trigger it how? I have no idea. Not many things trigger a special ability, and none of them exist in the Forbidden Cities. My dad will have to look into it. She repressed a sigh. Alden had a lot to look into, thanks to her. Fitz stopped. Her heart did that weird fluttery thing when their eyes met, and she had to look away to speak clearly. Thanks for your help today. I don't think I could have gotten through all this without you. He cleared his throat. I don't deserve your thanks. Why? He kicked the ground. Well, because I knew it was going to happen and didn't tell you when I made you come with me. I never realized it would be this hard for you to move here, not until I found you there on the floor. I feel like I ruined your life. Fitz. She paused to find the right way to explain the crazy emotions spinning through her. Today was hard, but you were right about what you said yesterday. This is where I belong. Fitz straightened up, like a weight was lifted off his shoulders. Really? Really. Don't worry about me. I'm going to be okay. She willed the words to be true, chanting them like a mantra as she shut herself in her room and changed into her pajamas. Still alone in the dark, with no one to tuck her in and no Marty on her pillow, she couldn't keep up the brave face any longer. She curled into a ball and cried for everything she'd lost. Chapter 15. She's alive! Fitz teased when Sophie wandered into the living room the next day. He sat in an overstuffed armchair reading a book called 25 Days to Catch the Wind. Do you realize you slept through breakfast and lunch, right? I did? Sophie looked around trying to find a clock, but everything was covered in weird clothes, like a costume shop threw up on the furniture. Sorry, guess I was tired. You had a rough day yesterday. Plus, your body needs rest while it detoxes, Della said, materializing in the very center of the room. Sophie clutched her chest. She couldn't understand how anyone could get used to the ghostly way vanishers appeared. Della frowned as she met Sophie's eyes. How are you doing? She shrugged. She didn't know how to answer. Well, you look great. Not that you weren't pretty before, but I think that detox made a difference. You should see how shiny your hair is, and your eyes are so exotic. You're going to be quite the heartbreaker when you grow up. Who is? Bianna strode into the room in a fitted dress with intricate gold embroidery that shimmered with every step. She looked way more glamorous than any 12-year-old had the right to look. Sophie, Della said, smiling at Sophie. Doesn't she look pretty today? There might have been things that were less embarrassing in that moment, but Sophie couldn't think of any. Especially when Bianna shrugged and asked, Isn't that the same dress you wore yesterday? All my other clothes were. She started to explain, but Della held up her hand. I'm sorry. I should have sent something up for you. I've been shopping all morning. She waved her arms at the explosion of clothes. Behold, your new wardrobe. That's all for me? Was she going to wear 5 outfits a day? Della winked. I got you everything you need, plus a few extras. The only thing I didn't get was a new Nexus. I figured you want to pick your own, unless you want to keep Fitz's old, beat-up one. She stared at the cuff on her wrist. This was yours? She asked Fitz. He nodded. She liked that, more than she wanted to admit. She fingered the sparkly stone, which was exactly the same color as his eyes. Do you want it back? I don't need it anymore. It's yours if you want it. She was very aware of everyone watching her, so he tried hard to sound casual as she said, might as well keep this one then, so it doesn't go to waste. She tried to make it a joke, but a touch of hurt leaked into her words. Della rushed to take her hands. Of course not. We thought you want to get settled into your new home. If you want to wait a few days, we'll unpack your stuff right now. Sophie swallowed to steady her voice. No, it's fine. In fact, I don't really want lunch. I'm not hungry. Her stomach was so knotted with nerves, there wasn't room for food. Della smiled sadly. You're going to like Grady and Adeline. Her palms dampened at the strange names. What are they like? They're great, Alden promised. They run an animal preserve at Havenfield, so they'll always have all kinds of exciting things going on. Do they have any kids? Della glanced at Alden. He looked away. Grady and Adeline lost their only daughter about 15 years ago. Her name was Jolie. She was 20 when she died. It was a terrible accident. Della covered her mouth with her hand. Alden shook his head. I'm not sure if they'll mention it, so you might want to see if they bring it up. That way, you'll know when they're ready to talk about it. And please, don't let that make you more nervous to meet them. I won't deny that their loss has affected them, but they're still two of the most wonderful people I know. You're going to like them. He offered her his hand. Come on, let's go meet your new guardians. What kind of animal preserve is this? Sophie asked as a booming roar shook the ground. Fenced-in pastures spread as far as she could see, filled with creatures that looked like mutant, scrambled versions of animals. Ella, in her bright blue gory, suddenly looked normal. Havenfield is one of the rehabilitation centers for a sanctuary, Alden explained. The animals are first brought here for training, before we release them into their protected home. And they're not easy to catch. We're still trying to trap Nessie. She's quite the escape artist. Those things live around humans? Where do you think the legends came from? Which is why it's not safe for them. We even had to collect endangered species, gorillas, lions, mammoths. Mammoths are extinct, she interrupted. Tell that to the living herd we have here at the sanctuary. You have a herd of woolly mammoths? Somehow that was harder to believe than goblins and ogres. We have colonies of everything. Mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, dinosaurs. He laughed when her jaw fell slack. Every species exists for a reason, and to allow... Another roar interrupted their conversation. Whatever it sounded like wasn't happy about its new diet plan. The path followed split, part of it winding down steep cliffs to a rocky beach lined with dark caves. Still, that path looks much less scary than the wide, flower-lined one they took to meet her new guardians. The path led to a wide meadow, where gnomes were using thick ropes to lasso what looked like a giant lizard covered in neon green feathers. The beast thrashed in protest. Oh, stop being such a drama queen, a husky male voice commanded from somewhere along the ropes and feathers. Roar! Okay, here goes nothing, he called. The gnomes tugged on the ropes, pulling the beast's neck low enough for a blond elf to heave himself up. No easy feat considering the beast was twice the size of an elephant. Snarl! I'm trying to help you, silly girl, he yelled as the beast bucked and thrashed. Sophie cringed, hoping she wasn't about to watch her new guardian become lizard food. Need a hand, Grady? Alden called. Nah, almost got it. He lunged and grabbed something that looked like a black tangle in the feathers. It twisted and writhed, but Grady yanked it off, nearly losing his balance in the process. The fluffy lizard stopped struggling as Grady... No problem, my friend. Verdi giving you trouble again? That's why she's our permanent resident. Would you like to meet a Tyrannosaurus, Sophie? Alden offered. Her eyes stretched wide at the name. So, the dinosaurs really weren't extinct. The idea was so impossibly cool. And yet, they looked nothing like what humans thought. Now, she knew what Fitz meant with his smug comments at the museum. Is it safe? She asked as she followed Alden forward. She wasn't sure if she was more nervous about the deadly dinosaur or about meeting Grady. It is now that she got the Jaculus off her neck. It's a winged serpent that feeds off of blood. She clung to Ella for support and moved Alden to the other side, away from the gnome, struggling to contain the blood-sucking snake. Easy there, Verdi, Alden said as the giant beast whipped her head towards him and Sophie. Verdi was more intimidating up close, with huge, yellow eyes, sharp claws, and a pointed snout. Sophie tried not to tremble as Verdi bent down in front of her, lowering her giant head to Sophie's height. Rows of sharp fangs glinted with the dinosaur slobber in the sunlight. Are you surprised by what dinosaurs really look like? Alan asked, motioning for her to come closer. I wasn't expecting neon feathers, she admitted, her legs refusing to take another step forward. Grady laughed beside her, and she whipped around to get a better glimpse of her new dinosaur-riding guardian. With his chiseled features and feather-covered tunic, she couldn't his handsome face stretched into a smile. You must be Sophie. She shook the feathery hand he offered and squeezed a little tighter. He didn't look scary, but her knees banged together anyways. Want to pet Verdi? Grady asked. She didn't really want to get closer to those deadly-looking teeth, but she didn't want Grady to think she was a wimp either. So she took a deep breath and stepped close enough to rub the T-Rex's cheek with a light touch. Verdi stayed docile, watching Sophie with her unblinking yellow eye. Sophie lost herself in the stare. She's still in pain, she said, not entirely sure how she knew. Is she? Grady separated the feathers on Verdi's neck. The wound is pretty deep. Maybe I should treat it. Sophie stepped back and plugged her nose as Grady spread stinky brown slime over the wound. It smelled like kelpie dung, Alden explained. Takes the sting out of most bites. She hoped she wouldn't have to touch any dung while living there. Grady closed the stinky jar and wiped his hands on a cloth the gnome handed him. I think you're right, Sophie. She seems more relaxed now. You must be good with animals. I can be. With normal animals, at least. She stole another look at the gigantic feathery lizard. Verdi was still watching her, and maybe she was crazy, but she could swear she was trying to thank her. Well, come on. Adeline's probably waiting. Grady's voice sounded wary, and his steps were almost as reluctant as Sophie's as he led him to a house overlooking the ocean. It was small compared to Aladdin's and Della's palatial estate, but a mansion by human standards. The house was taller than it was wide, with golden columns breaking up the etched glass walls, and a glittering cupola rose from the center of the roof. There was no fancy entryway like Everglades, just a huge room with clear walls overlooking the ocean, and scattered furniture breaking up the space. A wide central stairway curved up to the upper floors, and a chandelier of intricately braided crystals cascaded from the domed ceiling. It was simple but elegant and very, very clean. So clean, it didn't look lived in. Adeline swept into the room, with a pale blue dress made of wispy fabric that floated around her as she moved. She had soft, pink cheeks, wide, turquoise eyes, and amber hair that fell past her shoulders in soft curls. Aside from Della, she was the most beautiful woman Sophie had seen, except for the purple shadows under her eyes. Sophie's human mom had similar dark circles sometimes, but only when she was stressed. She wondered what Adeline was stressed about. She hoped it wasn't the idea of having her live with them. Adeline frowned